Okay, let's start. So before we actually start the interview, I'd like to
Yeah.
say that I'm very honored to be talking to you, as I was very inspired by your work specifically and Lotus in Hand activities when I just started my journey in cardistry.
Uh-huh.
And you were one of my favorite cardists, and Lotus in Hand was my favorite brand, and Blitz was just best video in my opinion. So I want to say a big thank you in advance, not only for being responsive and helping with organizing the events, but for your contribution to the community and for inspiring people like you inspire me, and for this big work for cardistry. So in the interview, we're going to cover specifically the brand, Lotus in Hand, as a project and as a lifestyle of yours. I'm sure it will be an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
So, can you briefly tell us the story of the brand? How did the idea come about, and what were the obstacles, and how did the team change over time?
I wanted to also thank you first for having me. I didn't know like Lotus in Hand and my work had like a personal impact on you like that. So that means a lot. And so going into the challenges that Lotus in Hand, well, first of all, our purpose to begin with was to do exactly what you said that I did for you, which is to inspire cardists, give cardists an easy platform to first of all learn cardistry through the bootcamp tutorials and stuff like that, right? And then also having the correct tools, to the best tools possible to perform cardistry in the form of the cards that we make, right? And so that was our purpose going in. As for challenges that we faced early on, um, there are, there are a lot. There are a lot of different facets to it. First of all, there is the market side of things, right? Like doing cardistry full time. How do you make it financially sustainable? Uh, Back then and even now, the most viable path to doing that was just to sell playing cards, right? Because there was no easy way for us to monetize like purely the cardistry that we do. So it had to be through playing cards. And so a lot of the challenge back then was what was the right way to go about that, because you had a lot of brands and doing very different things. For example, you'd have brands that just go very big on quantity, go wholesale. That was one strategy. And then there's the other strategy of just more of like the just smaller releases, smaller, higher quality releases, and controlling the quantity. So there were a lot of different decisions that we just had to go and try out through trial and error. For example, in the first few of our releases, it was a lot of we went with very big print runs for the early few decks like Ventus, Echo, OG Echoes, Flux, etc. And then we slowly learned that that wasn't sustainable financially. So we basically pivoted to another strategy. As for, there are also other facets, like obviously technically, like filming a video on a professional level, learning the technical stuff like that. There was also definitely a learning curve. Like if you compare our early work, like Eclipse, I would consider Eclipse like the first video that Lotus in Hand released after Curtis and I went full time. The production quality of that video, I can't say it's like terrible, but obviously it's not up to par with like some of our more recent work, right? So there was also overcoming that learning curve as well. So yeah, those are the main difficulties and challenges that come to my mind.
And what team did you have at the beginning?
Sorry, what
What
team?
what team? Yes.
Oh, you mean like the people involved?
Yes. Yes.
Ah, okay. So technically, Lotus in Hand as a team was founded in like, I believe it was like 2014, 2015-ish. But back then, none of us were doing it full time. We were just like a bunch of cardists releasing videos, tutorials, and stuff like that, right? And back then, it was myself, Curtis. There was this other Taiwanese cardist called YY. He goes by YY. He doesn't really have an English name. And Also, we had our photographer called Alan that helped us with a lot of the photography stuff. Back then it was just us, and then in 2018 when we officially like released a deck and went full time, that was mainly Curtis and I, but we also enlisted the help of the other cardists for like appearing in videos and occasionally helping with like production stuff. But since then it's mostly been Curtis and I doing it full time. And as for very recently, like towards the second half of last year, Curtis also had other responsibilities. So he still occasionally consults and helps, but I'm the only person doing it full time right now.
Okay, so you're really full-time the owner and the head of the brand, and you have no more jobs instead of this.
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't. Well, there are stuff that you can't really consider them jobs. You don't have like a full-time job, but like, for example, like if I'm investing in stuff, like that's not a job, right? So,
Yeah.
but yeah, so
Okay.
no real job outside of this.
So you talked about finding an approach in the beginning how to monetize cardistry. How do you think the situation about monetization changed over this time? Like how it was at the beginning, like 2018 when you started the brand, and now what's the major changes in the community and like the cardistry world in these terms?
You're talking strictly from like a perspective of monetizing cardistry, right?
Yes.
Okay. So from that perspective, to be honest, the most mainstream way to monetize cardistry is still selling playing cards, but the market has gotten quite a bit worse since. Like, and I think us as a community, we feel it. Like the atmosphere, like you have people saying cardistry is dead, stuff like that. It's palpable. You can feel like the market is just worse, and it's not just the cardistry creative side of things, but also the financial, the monetary side of things too. It has definitely gotten a bit rougher in the last, say, year and a half. But monetizing through playing cards is still the main way. But in the last couple years, I've also seen a few examples of people monetizing cardistry in ways that I did not expect, like Shivraj. Shivraj, he's just taking freelancing cases. Like he's just taking cases for videos, whether it be like big projects for like us or for like Orbit, or also just doing like Instagram reels for bicycle playing cards, stuff like that.
Yeah, that's really
So,
cool.
yeah, he has taken a different approach to monetizing cardistry that I did not think was possible. It's closer to the pure approach of just strictly monetizing cardistry and nothing else. And another example of someone that's doing that, I think, is also Yang, but he's been on a bit of a break lately. But he, at some point, he was doing this like full time, just taking video projects and just doing it. That was his only job for quite a while.
He was getting money from social media, like official monetization, like TikTok or...
Yeah, and he was. Oh, you mean that? That I'm not sure about, but he had sponsors and he had people hire him to film videos and stuff like that.
That's cool.
As for straight up monetizing his content through like TikTok, I don't think that was happening. I'm not sure.
Okay, let's get back kind of to the brand, and what part of the success do you think your name has played, and would the brand have risen the same way if you weren't recognizable beforehand as a cardist?
You mean me personally, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I think it definitely played a role. I think with most cardistry brands, you see the founder or the founding team always has a cardist that people respect on a technical or creative level, just outside of the cards, right? So I think that definitely played a big role, especially because when I started it, you could say I was kind of still fresh off CCC, so I was in like people's recent memory, you would say. So I think that definitely helped for sure. But you're making me think if I could have done this without going through CCC, and the answer is probably not. I think probably not.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So also you mentioned that your goal was to improve the community in the sense of education, because Lotus in Hand is known for YouTube playlists of Cardistry Basics, Cardistry Bootcamp, and everyone recommends them, and even I started with them. And are there any plans for the brand to exaggerate its contribution to cardistry education, maybe create a school or to make online courses or something? Have you thought about it?
We have like I want to talk about live courses first, because we've had people reach out to us in the past, but we feel like it's a relatively ineffective way of educating people. Like, it can only be one-on-one, and it's either in person or you're like doing a video call one-on-one, and we just feel like the scale of that and is just relatively small, and it's really not the best use of our time compared to doing like video and uploading to like YouTube, where tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people can see it, right? So that's why we've leaned more towards doing video content on social media. And moving on to that, we haven't been releasing much in terms of education lately, but the reason is because when we were thinking about how to approach the Cardistry Bootcamp, the whole idea was that this bootcamp was supposed to be a comprehensive thing where you go through it and that's everything you have to know. That's everything you have to know to be a legit cardist. So anything on top of that, in my opinion, is unnecessary. Sure, I could teach a newer move of mine, but it's not essential to you becoming a competent cardist, in my opinion. So the Cardistry Bootcamp was like the core. Like, you go through that and you're done, pretty much.
Okay, it really is such a thing. Actually, it gives a view of the community and the genre. But actually, I think there are some more performative aspects that could be covered, but it's up to you. So educate on that or not. Cardistry Bootcamp is still a very big contribution.
Wait. Before we move on, can I ask you what you think we could expand upon? I'm curious.
Okay. I mean, cardists, in my opinion, should think about performing for regular people, laymen, and in this case, cardists should grow in themselves kind of discipline to practice moves properly. So you sit back with the camera and you learn how to analyze your moves. I have problems like personally with that, and I'm planning to give more time to practice and analyzing my moves and polishing them. But I really felt that it's crucial last half a year, because I did a live performance which went, I don't know, it was average. I liked working on it creatively, but I suddenly felt that I need more skill to feel more comfortable on stage. And I think now cardists are missing this performative side, like a good execution. So, and also the selection of moves for the solo video and live performance is totally different. You performing in the whole different surface. Like the projection for live audience is most of the times vertical. You do moves in this plane, but when you record a video, it's most of the time it's camera from up to down. If you watch solo videos, and this is big problem. I think it should be both. Like we should develop downward-looking moves and like straight ones. I hope I spoke correctly. Sorry for my English.
No, I think I get what you're getting at, but like, we did have like one video on performing and we had one video on practicing, but I definitely agree that there are a lot of details that you could go into more to expand on that, because like the angle stuff that you just mentioned, like having you were talking about how wait, was your performance like a stage performance or was it like a
Yes,
close up? It was stage
it,
performance. Yeah,
it
so
was a little stage, but yes.
completely different for a video, right? Like it's distance from afar and from the front.
Yes.
You can't adjust their angle like a camera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, those are definitely nuances that we didn't really get into, and we probably could. So yeah, if we ever do something like a boot camp, like expansion
Mhm.
pack, that would be something that we could,
Yeah,
yeah,
because I
do.
think if cardists would be skillful in this domain, I'm sure they will have more opportunities to monetize their art and to make live performances more frequently.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah,
do feel like the performance aspect, whether it be live performances for an audience or even just performing for a camera for a video, like both of them are undervalued currently in our community. I think
yes,
we're tipped a bit too far towards the side of like the creative aspect and focusing purely on that and not much on the practicing and performing side of things.
yes, because sometimes you better take an original move in your move list that fits the idea better and the format of your performance, and it will work better than what you have created yourself. And
Sure.
also, I wanted to say that there's also an aspect of working on moves in terms of optimization, like not just creating a move and leaving it as it is. You have found a good shape, and when you found it, you need to adjust the mechanics, like finger positioning, so it works easier and more efficient. And uh, I think it's very rarely mentioned in like tutorials or like
That's
videos for beginners.
That's true because I mean we did have a video on like completing your move, finding like the right
Mhm.
opener and closer, but like stuff like mechanics, getting rid of like regrips, stuff like that.
Yes.
Stuff like that could take like half a year or even years after the core part of the move is done, right? And yeah, we that is definitely something that we could have taught more and that isn't really discussed enough or emphasized enough in our community because I also think that's because with the shift of most content being on Instagram over YouTube, I think people are less concerned with how refined the move is. Like they just have the core of the move and they're just like, ah, here it is. Very quick. The process is very quick.
Yes. So there's a big room for improvement.
Yeah, for sure.
So you also mentioned creating good tools for cardists, very quality decks that work especially for cardistry as a goal of the brand. What's the secret behind Lotus Hand decks? What stages do you emphasize while creating them, and what do you pay the most attention to?
So when we think about using playing cards, there are really three aspects to it, right? There's creating, practicing, and performing. And they're like when you make a deck, I think you should be trying to enhance at least one of these three things, right? Because that's the cardist experience. And so most of our stuff focuses on the performing side. Like the performing side is basically how you design the deck such that when you do the moves, it accentuates the moves. And so like our decks like duos, tetras, and echoes, I think all achieve that pretty well. So that's mainly what we're designing towards. But the other two aspects, I think, are actually like the two aspects I talked about, creating and practicing. The practicing part of things, it's mostly just the handling of the cards, right? So as long as you have a nice, high quality deck that handles properly, can fan, can cut, and like lasts long, stuff like that. As long as you have that, I think you're addressing the practicing side. But the creating side is something that I haven't. It's tough. Like designing a deck for someone to create moves is not exactly something that we've really seen or something that's easy to do. The only thing that I think has come close to that was I'm not sure if you remember Technique playing cards by Chris Severson.
Yes.
That's the only example I have in mind that is a deck that is designed towards helping people create. So, but that's a very niche thing. But so yeah, back to Lotus in Hand's central like design philosophy. It's basically designing decks that accentuates your performance and makes it as easy as possible for you to practice with. And from our experience, it happens to be that the type of style of a deck that works towards this happens to be minimalistic. It's not like we went into this deciding, we want to make minimalistic decks. It's more like CARDISTRY chose minimalistic decks, and we're like, okay, so it has to be this. Yeah, so that's our approach towards designing these cards, really.
It's a very good idea that CARDISTRY chose minimalistic decks. Never heard of it before. So actually, it sounds very Lotus hand. Your decks really feel like it, like you said.
Thank you.
A very interesting question, personally for me. How do you plan Lotus in Hand releases, and how far out?
Okay, so this one is a weird one because it varies quite a bit. Like from deck to deck, they're pretty different. Like you would have decks that are okay, let's first draw the distinction between like brand new designs and recolors, right? Obviously, recolors take less effort. There's just no denying that. But so those we usually plan a couple months out, like say 3 or 4 months, because it takes like a month to print and maybe a month to. Obviously, there's the color switch, but there's also a lot of details like doing the ad cards, the name, the theme, all of that, the product photos, etc., etc. So it does take a month to produce, and then maybe a month or two to conceptualize and like prepare all the marketing material required. So I'd say the whole process for a deck like that is more like 3 or 4 months. Whereas there are other decks that are like brand new designs, brand new projects. Those can take a very long time, like over a year. Like when you start designing them, you have no clue when they're going to release. Like you don't know how far into the future that is. And an example of that would be like the thermochromic deck, like thermosolids. That deck, like I pitched the idea to the factory like 2019, and then it got made in like I believe 2021. I believe it's 2021, because it took time for the factory to like look for suppliers, stuff like that, and we had to really push them to do it. So there was a lot of that back and forth. So it could take years for something like that to happen. And there are also okay, there I was gonna use the example of another deck, but like it's not released yet, so I can't really talk about it. But there are more decks that are like purely, even if it's not the like thermosol is obviously special because of the ink, like the physical materials, right? But even if it's just a brand new design, like say for example, before we released duos, like the first deck of duos, coming up with the design and finalizing that, conceptualizing that took a long time. Like I think an even better example is Tetras, because with Tetras, it might look like a very simple deck, but there are a lot of conscious decisions involved in there. I might actually have a prototype that I can show you. Maybe. Wait a sec. If we're lucky. Okay, I do. So, you might think Tetras, like, what do you have to do to design that? Like, it's just like boxes. Like, what are you doing? But simple stuff like the ratio, right? Simple stuff like the ratio of where to put this line was like, we went back and forth on this.
It's prototype, yes?
Yeah, this is a prototype. This took us a long time to decide whether we wanted to go with something more like this, where it's like something closer to like the golden ratio, or like 50-50, half-half. And then we eventually decided that because a lot of moves like the Charlier, right? I'm not sure if you can see this. Oh, like this happens to line up. But if this is the opposite side, then this does not much, right?
Yes.
So it took us a lot of time to decide on finally, like, okay, it has to be 50-50. And then stuff like the colorway also takes longer than I think people would expect. So a deck like Tetras is usually like maybe a year in advance from conceptualizing to finally having the deck released.
What was the work on the colors, by the way, in terms of Tetra, like in this?
So what? Sorry, what about the colors?
What was special about the colors when you were designing Tetra, for example?
Oh, I mean, obviously, like from the prototype, you can see that we had decided on like a gray base, right? Oh, here, yeah, a gray base. But there were a lot of different combinations of like two colors you can pick that look good. Like this is an example of one that I think looks decent, but we didn't go with. There's also basically we had to choose for the first deck. We wanted to choose a color combination that wasn't that risky, basically. So we did end up going with like that, like coral and cyan combo that you eventually saw.
So it's basically complementary colors, almost. Yeah. Okay. So it's basically like a queue of the projects you have for like next year or two, or how does it
for
look?
like a brand new design? Yeah, it could be that far out, but so it's not all decks, but some are like that.
So you showed as a prototype of Tetra deck.
Yep.
I think it would be very interesting to make kind of a publication or article with prototype designs and showing like the process of design. Have you thought about it?
That's true. I have not thought about that because we do have a lot of random prototypes of like early versions of designs that we could show but never did. But the reason why I'm usually hesitant to do that is, I mean, there is a reason we went with the final version. We think it's the best version. Yeah. So why would we present suboptimal stuff, right? Even if it's in the context of prototypes. I don't know if I want to do that, honestly.
It could be like once and never repeated before, like article on some decks, and in my opinion. I don't know.
Yeah, I've never thought about that though, so I'll give that a thought.
So many cardists obviously think about their card brand at least once, so that people don't have any illusions. Could you, as a head of a cardist brand, a cardist company, describe your typical day, what you have to do in general, what the routine is like?
Oh, that's a tough one because there is no like typical day.
Typical. They're all different.
It's not like a 9-to-5 job where you clock in, you clock out, right? It's more free flowing in the sense that when there are projects with deadlines due, like it's very hardcore. You're either like filming the whole day back to back for like 3-4 days, and then after that you go into editing for like another 3-4 days. It's either very intense like that, or it's more downtime and relaxed, like in between projects where you're just kind of waiting for stuff to happen. Like if you're waiting for the decks to produce, like what are you gonna do, right? So in that downtime, it's more of just like collecting stuff that inspires you, or like listening to music, playing with cards. I mean, that part, in my opinion, is like the dream that people usually imagine, the easier part. But there's also the other half where it's just a lot of intensive labor.
Can you count how many roles do you combine?
Roles?
Yes.
Oh, that I can't count. I'll list off a few that come to off the top of my head. So like obviously you're designing, right? You're designing the cards, and you're overseeing manufacturing to some degree. Like I have to go to the factory to see everything.
By the way, after you list these roles, can you like describe the process of negotiating with manufacturers? What was it like?
Remind me at the end of this. Yeah, but so manufacturing, like overseeing manufacturing, obviously filming and editing. You could even count that as two roles. Filming and editing, being the cardist part, obviously, like creating moves, performing moves, practicing moves, stuff like that. And then there's more back-end stuff like designing and running a website, etc. And then,
do you run a website by yourself?
Oh yeah, well, the current version, like we had an early version that was designed by someone else, but the current version that we have, that's me. So,
are you a programmer?
I'm not a hardcore programmer, but I understand the basics enough where I can just take parts of code and move it around. You know what I mean? Yeah, but I'm nowhere near a real programmer, so to speak.
What education do you have, by the way?
I studied actuarial math and business economics in like UCLA, the States, and there were like one or two programming courses, so I know like the
Okay.
basics. Yeah, so that's
So
that.
so knowing mathematics helps you in the business, or
Well,
or how does it
it
affect?
helps, but only on it only helps like the financial side of things, like like accounting, like making financial decisions of like where to price the decks, how many decks to print, stuff like that. Obviously, stuff like
Mhm.
that, math and economics help, but the creative side of things, obviously not. It doesn't help at all. It's just unrelated.
But what does a person need to know before creating their card brand? What books might need to be read? What
Oh
topics should be
man,
explored? Do you have
oh
any
man,
advice?
there's too much. There's too much because like it was so much trial and error for us early on until we settled on the correct like direction and image that we wanted for our brand. I'd say we really got into that mode finally of like a stable like image and brand in like 2020. Maybe like when we released Arctic Duos. I think around that time was when we finally decided, okay,
That was controversial deck.
I know it was. Yeah, that was definitely interesting. But yeah, that was when we decided the direction for our brand, and we really didn't waver from it since then. So I think the best advice I can give to anyone that wants to start a cardistry brand is to know what the purpose of your brand is, what your brand should be doing, what you want the image of the brand to be like, and what demographic you're targeting, like whether it's like hardcore cardists or more like magicians or collectors or even a more mainstream audience, because there are brands that hit a more mainstream audience. I would argue that the verts are currently more in that direction than towards hardcore cardists right now. So stuff like that, I think big picture stuff for your brand, you definitely have to decide first before going in. And if you don't have a clear purpose that your brand is supposed to serve and fulfill, then I don't know if you should be getting into this. Like, why are you really doing this, right?
Okay, so one question that I was asking you, and you asked me to remind, how does the negotiation with manufacturer goes?
So in general, to be honest, the negotiation is it's tough because for the manufacturers, our scale, like the most cardistry brand scale of like 1,000 decks, maybe 2,500 decks at most, is tiny, like tiny for them. Like they have customers that are like casinos that'll print tens of thousands of decks at a time. So for us, it's honestly a bit hard to negotiate. Like we don't have much leverage on them financially, but what I think you can do is more so make their lives easier. Like, for example, like the thermochromic deck, thermosolids that I told you about earlier, we brought it up to them a couple years in advance. They originally just were like, no, we're not doing that. They're like, why would they do that, right? So we had to find. I personally went out and looked for suppliers, and I gave them like some suppliers, like, okay, these are people you can buy this ink from. Like, just so
Mm.
basically, you're doing some work that you can do for them that isn't directly the manufacturing, like the pre-planning part. You could make that easier for them, so that they're more likely to help you with stuff like this. So, and the same applies to our photochromic deck, like the mint green normals and the ultraviolet normals. That was a similar process. So yeah, I think it's pretty much there's not much negotiating you can do in terms of like price, but there's more so developing like a working relationship where you're trying to help them out as much as possible so that you can get these ambitious projects through. And a more recent example is, oh, also I want to remind people that when you're manufacturing stuff, it's important to be flexible with the product, and also flexible with like which manufacturer you work with, right? Because there's recently been a deck where usually we print in Taiwan, right? But there's a deck where the box is a special material that they just can't produce, so we had to find another manufacturer in mainland China to produce the box, ship the box to Taiwan, and then they box it here in Taiwan. So stuff like that, you have to be flexible with. You can't just permanently stick to one manufacturer. You could potentially source different manufacturers to make the complete product that you want.
That's definitely useful for young entrepreneurs who will only join this like game of cardistry brand business.
Oh man, I hope they don't join right now, but it's definitely an interesting challenge.
So, by the way, is there any open source information on like structure of playing cards and manufacturers and how they work? What are the stocks, finishes, or do you have to get in contact with them privately?
Yeah, I think it's more so this what you mentioned at the end. It's because each manufacturer has different stocks and finishes, right? They're all mostly proprietary, so you do have to reach out to them individually to get detailed information on the option of stocks, the option of finishes and varnishes, etc. The only few where this information is more publicly known is like the biggest ones like USPCC. Everyone knows that there's like the classic stock, there's the crush stock, etc. There's like the standard air cushion finish and smooth finish. Like it's only publicly available information because like it's been the norm for so long and everybody just knows it. But when it comes to like smaller manufacturers, whether it be in mainland China or Taiwan, like you do have to ask them separately.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think about manufacturers, it could be like a separate interview because it's a big topic, and I feel like there's a lot of information people don't know about cards, what they consist of, and how they are made. We just take it for granted. And by the way, do you have this like picture of playing cards technologies in your mind, like how well you understand it now over after this 6 years of managing Lotus in Hand?
I definitely understand it a lot better now, but like going into it, we basically didn't know anything. Like very surface level stuff, like okay, there's a stock, there's a finish. That's about it. That's pretty much all we know. Like how they execute that, what the machines look like, what the workflow is like. We didn't know about any of that until it was only very recently that I eventually have a good enough working relationship with our manufacturer that they let me into the factory, which is not something that most factories do. Like they don't generally let people in. So it was very recently that I finally got to see like their machine and exact workflow while printing the cards. And I can definitely I can definitely confirm what you said about most of us beforehand, like just taking it for granted, not knowing what's happening. There are a lot of difficult stuff going on in the background. For example, you know how the finishes of our cards, right? It's basically like tiny little holes on the surface of the paper, right? It's actually quite tough for the standard printer to print the ink straight like into the finish. Like these holes, because sometimes they're deeper than usual, the ink doesn't really settle in and you get these white little dots on the surface of the cards. I wish I could find one for you right now, but I can't. But usually they're darker color cards where there would be like white dots on it. And when stuff like that happens, like there's nothing you can do other than pretty much to find a different batch of paper, because they're always the same paper. You're always ordering the same paper, but obviously there's this margin of error that could cause this difference. So you just have to find another batch of paper and reprint it. Like that's all you can do. There's not much you can do besides that. And speaking of margin of error, that's something we hear so often while producing playing cards. It's frustrating because this margin of error that the average cardist might not know about affects everything about the handling. Because I have people reach out to me all the time and tell me like, oh, for example, like, oh, this deck handles so good, or oh, this deck handles so bad. And I always tell them it's the same stock and the same finish, and it's all in the margin of error. Like, I swear, like it's all in the margin of error. Like some random factors, like whether it's raining when they print it, whether it's humid, stuff like that, that could determine everything. That could determine if your deck turns out drier or more slippery.
Wow,
So
that's whole science.
yeah. So it's there's a lot of uncontrollable little factors that could drastically affect the outcome of the playing cards that people really would not expect.
Are there any cardists or people who admire cardistry or like just follow the community in the world of manufacturers who work there? Do you have any friends? I don't know.
The manufacturer that I most frequently work with, they were people that started off as magicians. Like obviously magicians are very heavily involved with playing cards too, right? So that makes sense. But in terms of for cardistry, there is this other manufacturer in mainland China that I've recently been working with. They do hire like cardists to like either design stuff or like do sales, because obviously cardists would know other cardists that want to print, right? So it makes sense to hire cardists as salespeople. But in terms of like the higher ups, like the big bosses, I'm not sure. I don't think so, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cardists need to make their own manufacturing.
Maybe. I don't know, man. Like that scale,
it's too hard.
Our market cannot support that scale, unfortunately.
By the way, it's strange in some sense because like the deck of cards is such a small, compact, and comfortable object that almost everyone can like carry in the pocket and use in a lot of cases, like when they have free time, and it's a very open and kind of
like accessible, right?
accessible, yes, accessible hobby. And I think we should as a community think of making this potential come to life in some degree. I think we should talk a bit about like video production. How do you approach media and advertisement of your products, and are there any criteria considering which you choose cardists for like solo videos or something?
Are you talking about in wait, let me think. Are you talking about in general or specifically for our brand?
For brands.
Okay, so for our brand specifically, because our target demographic is like hardcore cardists that actually cares about the cardistry, right? Because you could easily find another very skillful cardist that can perform moves, but the moves might not necessarily be original. And like for us, we value the originality a lot while selecting the cardist. So you'll notice that when we film these videos specifically for YouTube, they're almost always like cardists with an entirely new set of material just for this video, right? So that is very important to us. But if you wanted to talk about more of the planning,
it also
yeah.
Let me say a word. So it also looks like you're highlighting particularly Asian cardistry. Is it right?
Oh, okay. So the thing about that is, it's not like we decided we're only featuring Asian cardists. It's more like they're the most financially feasible for us to fly over and film because they're close, right? So it just happens to be that way. Yeah, but if I happen to be based in the US or Europe, maybe it would be entirely different.
But actually, it looks very harmonical and like conceptual. So you're the brand from Taiwan, and you highlight the cardistry from Asia, and it kind of falls into one idea and maybe a goal.
In terms of highlighting cards
from a side,
from Taiwan specifically, there's definitely an intention like behind that for sure, because I feel like a lot of these cardists otherwise would be very hard to discover. Like in terms of Taiwan specifically, I definitely think we were definitely intentionally trying to do that. But cardists beyond Taiwan, honestly, it's just a regional thing. Like it's just financially more feasible. That's all. That's all that is. But like, if cardists, if there were cardists that were capable of fully producing their videos on them by their like on their own, by that I mean like filming plus editing, then we would work with them too. Like Gabby, for example, we did like 2 videos with him, right? Because he has a team that can properly um, film and edit on a pretty high level.
Yes, these were very good videos. I like them. So I interrupted you while you were answering. Do you remember what you were saying?
Oh yeah, I think I was talking about. You were asking about. Um, were you asking about what were you asking about video production again? You were asking about
videos and like your approach to advertisement and stuff, media.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so traditionally it's been mostly YouTube videos in the past, but recently we've noticed that YouTube videos really just don't perform that well, unfortunately. So we've been experimenting with doing more advertising material on Instagram, like stuff like my own I don't know if I'd even call it a solo. I don't think it's a solo. It's more of like a little like new, you know, like it's a collection of moves. I don't know if I consider it a solo. But then so that a video like that or a video like 4 by Ian, you know, Ian Yang.
Oh.
Like the video we did for Ether Duos.
It's on Instagram or
yeah, it's on Instagram. But basically we've been experimenting with doing more serious marketing content on Instagram. And so this shift we're still working that out. But in terms of if we're talking about strictly about YouTube videos, we do have a very fixed approach to it. We were discussing the moves earlier, right? Like how we would select cardists with brand new set of moves. The length of it, we usually want it to be between 2.5 to 3.5 minutes with about 10 to 15 moves. That's what I've personally found to be the right amount. Where, because it's a personal thing, but I feel like when I see a lot of videos that are like 1.5 minutes long, I get to the end of it, and I'm like, oh wait, that was it. It's like oh, it didn't. Like you're left just wanting more. That's what I personally think. So, and I feel like videos over like 3.5 are usually a bit too drawn out, and people struggle to finish them. So, what I've found is 2.5 to maybe 3.5 is the sweet spot.
Okay, thank you. And to finish this interview, what interesting things can we expect from the brand in the next 5 years?
5 years, okay. That's a longer term than I expected.
Okay.
5 years, like ideally, I want to be pushing out like even more crazier products, because like personally, I've been pretty focused on the product side of things lately, and I think we've witnessed a pretty rapid like improvement in technology when it comes to printing on playing cards. Like, for example, like the thermochromic deck, the photochromic deck we did, all sorts of foils being like very accessible right now thanks to mainland China lowering the costs for that. Like, I mean, these things existed outside of our realm of printing playing cards before. Like, obviously we didn't invent this, but it is the technical difficulties of printing them on like stocks with like this thickness and with like the finish that makes it challenging, and which is why it took so long after this technology has been invented to finally see it applied onto our kind of playing cards, right? And I think we've witnessed this rapid improvement like pretty significantly in the last couple years. And like lately you've seen like the foil. Have you seen the curved mirrors? Have you seen those?
Yes, it's very impressive.
That's
Unbelievable.
crazy stuff. Like what,
Yes.
what is happening there, right? Like what is that? It's flat? How?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, but stuff like that, there's still so much more tech that I feel like we can apply to playing cards. So I'm looking forward to experimenting with a lot of that. But aside from the materials themselves, I'm also excited to find new ways to just use graphics, just plain graphics, to improve the looks of cardistry. We've been doing it with a few of our decks already, and I've also been pretty impressed with some of the work that YGH is doing, like the butterflies. I think those look really cool. I think those are something that our community hasn't really experimented much with. So I do think there's still definitely a very high ceiling when it comes to designing graphics for the purpose of cardistry that we have not reached yet. So I look forward to be able to explore that ceiling maybe in the next 5 years. And as for the other side of things, I will have to think about the education stuff that you mentioned. Like, is there anything that the Cardistry Bootcamp is maybe missing that I could maybe create another series to add on to it so that it's a complete package? So if I can think of enough stuff to do, then that's definitely something we could be doing in the next 5 years, as you say.
That sounds great. We'll be following your brand and wait for the new releases. Thank you.
I appreciate the support.
It was brilliant, very informative interview. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.